Okay, so here we're going to have a look at the more detailed notes. Now, this is just the overall chart from the last video that you had a look at. I should say before we start that these notes are a combination from the Keynotes book, from Leaving Cert Lecture Days, and from Less Stress, More Success, the Comparative. I think they were all the books I used. And I just put all the information together in this. So we're going to have a look at the first page. There are 3 pages of a chart. So we're going to have a look at the first one now. Okay, this is what the first page looks like. So when you're making your own notes on your own A3 page, you need to rule it according, obviously, to how this is set out. If you feel you could organise it a different way, which is more easy for you to understand, that's absolutely fine. And now we're going to go straight in and we're going to look at society and setting. So let's get going. Okay, first topic, society and setting. So, society and setting in The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is set in the Roaring 20s in the Jazz Age in America. It was a time of great social change, and it was during the Prohibition era from 1920 to 1933, which did have no public support, and a lot of bootleggers made their money off making moonshine, the equivalent of poaching. Okay, we get to see 5 different settings. Okay, so we see West Egg. So West Egg is vulgarity. It's new money. It's where Gatsby lives. It's full of celebrities and materialisms. Gatsby's house is tasteless, showing a lack of sophistication as it's a copy of Hotel de Ville. So that's West Egg. East Egg, then we see old money. This is the Buchanans. It's opulent, it's exclusive, and it's steeped in tradition. Daisy and Tom's house is described as a white palace. The Buchanans' house equals good taste. It's a Georgian colonial, suggests an ancestral background, so that they have tradition there. Then we see New York, the city. It is social variety and vitality. It's racy, adventurous, light, it's colourful. People are given anonymity there. They're not known. There is infinite possibility. It is radical and it is a free society. Then we see Valley of the Ashes. It's grotesque. It's a symbol of death and decay. It's a wasteland and represents the lower classes who were denied access to money and success. And due to this, there is moral decay. So there is no real morals within this area. And obviously that's where we are introduced to Myrtle and George. And then we hear about it. We don't necessarily see it. The Midwest, where Nick is from, it's very upright, conservative. It's a conservative lifestyle. And there are strong family values. So they are the 5 different settings we see in The Great Gatsby. Right, we're going to move on to Playboy. So, in Playboy of the Western World, the play was first performed in 1907, and its depiction of rural peasants in the west of Ireland was deemed to be unpatriotic and insulting. It also showed the Irish were not fit to govern themselves, or that's how people perceived it. The Gaelic League promoted literature and cultural identity, about reviving the Irish culture, Irish language. Poets like Yeats were involved in this. And Playboy of the Western World was seen to be doing the opposite of what the Gaelic League wanted. Men were shown as drunks, women were shown as foul-mouthed, religion was lampooned, and there was a sense of violence that hung over the play. And as you know, on the very first night Playboy was shown, there was riots in the street. They didn't even get to finish the play. So that's within the cultural context of within which the play was performed. In 1907, Ireland, which is the society in the play, we see a world of the play. The people are culturally similar. They're white Irish Catholic peasants. Mayo is very insular. There is gossip, there's no racism, and little connection to the outside world. The people are patriarchal and proud. There is obviously the marrying of cousins, which is Peggy and Mike and Sean Keogh, and it's all about a marriage of convenience, making a good bargain. With the arrival of the outsider Christie, it has the same effect as Gatsby in New York. People are curious. There's gossip about him and people wonder about him. And they also worry about the severity of his crimes, which is very similar to what happens to Gatsby, where people question if he's a murderer. Okay, so that is society and setting for Playboy of the Western World. Okay, in Brooklyn, we see two distinct cultural contexts. We see 1950s Ireland and 1950s New York. Brooklyn is a bridge between The Great Gatsby and Playboy of the Western World, and the viewers learn about both societies at the same time. So 1950s Ireland, we see is struggling economically. There it is stale culturally. It's dominated by the Catholic Church. Education is not accessed by all. Jobs were scarce and the marriage ban was in place, which meant that if a woman got married, she could no longer continue to work. And in number 6, young people left Ireland. For example, Eilish Lacey. She left because there was no possibilities for her. Immigration, leaving Ireland. Sorry, can't think of the word. Was a huge issue back then because there was no possibilities. There was no opportunities for anyone. So when Eilish leaves, we go to New York and we see that it is hugely different to Ireland. The economy is in a post-war boom. The suburbs are beginning to grow. It is socially diverse, although we don't really witness racism and anti-Semitism like we do in The Great Gatsby through Tom. And Nick, kind of. New York is full of different ethnicities, such as Manhattan and Coney Island, and this shapes Eilish not like Ireland in the Playboy of the Western World. Eilish becomes more confident. Not all immigrants find America endearing, though. At Christmas Day, we see Irish men who are lost, lonely and defeated, and these are the men who built America's bridges and roads, and they're just left on their own, isolated. Eilish eventually learns to seize her opportunities. And obviously, this is a complete different view, where immigrants are welcomed in New York at the time, to the views we see expressed by Tom Buchanan in The Great Gatsby, which was in the 1920s, just pre-war. So the ideology of society at that time, not by everyone, but by some people, was the idea of white supremacy. I wouldn't go as strong to say Tom was a white supremacist, but that idea was there, that ideology was there in the background. Okay, so that is Brooklyn, and they are the societies we witness in all three of our texts. Okay, this is meant to read The Role of Men, horrific photo. Okay, so now we're going to look at the role of men in all three texts. So, first one is Gatsby. In 1920s America, gender roles are clearly defined, but are undergoing change. We see 3 types of masculinity or men. So the first one is Tom Buchanan. He's the alpha male. He is aggressive. He's moneyed, so he comes from wealth. He sees women as inferior, hypocritical. He's a polo and a football player. He has very few redeeming qualities, and he shows the worst aspects of the super rich. He lacks morality in a sense of right and wrong, and he disregards the law. He has a high status because he's called Tom Buchanan of Chicago, and this gives him a sense of entitlement, and he looks down on Gatsby and on the Wilsons as not having any culture or tradition or background. He's a womanizer. Obviously, he's married to Daisy. He has the affair with Myrtle, but Daisy also lets us know that there has been rumours about him and a chambermaid too. I have loves Daisy in brackets there because you can argue that he does love Daisy. And overall, he is brutal, violent and racist. The second sort of masculinity we see then is Gatsby. And he's portrayed as a romantic, a poet, an idealist, a dreamer and a fantasist. He is softer and gentler than Tom, and he's gallant. He is a hero and a villain. So he's a bootlegger and a gambler, and he's linked to Meyer Wolfsheim, who obviously has dealings in the underworld, or the criminal underworld. He's a self-made man. His wealth, and he's invented the persona of Jay Gatsby. He was born James Gatz to a family in North Dakota. He is ultimately devoted to Daisy and does all he does in the hope of meeting her again. And this is great because of the magnitude of his dream. Daisy is unworthy of his admiration, and ultimately he is lonely, and when he dies, no one attends the funeral. So that's the type of man we see. Gatsby, kind of like a new man for the new century. And then we've Nick Carraway, who's a single man, is close to his family and respectful of women. He does not wish to be the centre of attention, unlike Tom and Gatsby. He is one of the few guests to ever be invited to Gatsby's house, and he's egotistical and not humble. He is free to express himself, and his freedom is respected. Okay, so that is Nick Carraway. And that is the role of men in Gatsby. We'll move on to Playboy now. Okay, so in Playboy, the society of Playboy is patriarchal. Men control the women's lives, yet there is a reversal of gender norms. Men are weaker and the women are dominant. The first example of this is Christy Mahon. He is vulnerable, needy and insecure. He allows women to decide his fate in Peggy and Widow Quinn. He is mocked for his vanity. He is bitter about how women and his father have treated him in the past, and you can link his vanity there to Gatsby. And at the end of the play, he acts traditionally masculine. Old Mahon allows him to take the dominant role in the future relationship. But up until then, you can argue that he did not behave or act in a masculine way. The second character we have here is Sean Keogh, and he's another main example. He's even weaker than Christy. Peggy despises him and takes the female role in their relationship. He feels a responsibility towards his future wife, Peggy, as a protector from Christy. He is mocked by everyone, and the arranged marriage, which between Sean and Peggy, shows a patriarchal society. Another version of masculinity in the role of men we see is Michael Flaherty, who's Peggy's father, and he is very similar to Tom Buchanan from Gatsby. He's unenthusiastic about his role as a father to Peggy, and he uses violence as a necessary part of being a man. Okay, so while you could argue he's a strong male, it's not necessarily a good thing, and Sean and Christy obviously are the weaker of the men. They're probably the weakest out of all three texts. Okay, we'll move on to Brooklyn. Okay, so in Brooklyn, the roles of men and women are clearly defined. It captures a change in the role of women, which we can start to see happen in Gatsby with the character of Jordan, but in Brooklyn we see it more towards the end of where it goes. But in 1950s, it's still a patriarchal society. The only version of a male influence we see here is Tony Fiorello. He's a gentleman, he's unpresumptuous and he's honest. He's romantic and sentimental. He does not want to be stereotypical, and he values and loves Eilish for herself, just as a woman he will marry and have his children. Not just as a woman he will marry and have his children. They marry out of love. He genuinely does love her. Okay, he genuinely wants things to be better. So while he is the breadwinner, Eilish has a job of her own, but we see how honest he is, and you can argue that that's similar to Nick in The Great Gatsby, the idea of honesty. But out of all the men that we witness, Tony is probably the more true to himself, if that makes sense. So that's the role of men in all three texts. So this is the second page, and on this we cover the role of women and social class. So the role of women. So the role of women in The Great Gatsby. Women of the era did not enjoy freedom. They are obedient, dutiful and subservient, with the exception of Jordan. So the three women we look at in Gatsby are Daisy, Jordan and Myrtle. So Daisy is reliant on Tom and on Gatsby. So she's reliant on all the men in her life. She never had any real independence. She was never allowed to make any decisions for herself. And she was prevented by her family to leave to be with Gatsby. And ultimately, at the end of the novel, she can't even muster up the courage to leave Tom. She is a reluctant mother. Pammy is essentially, the daughter, is essentially been raised by a servant. She is unhappy in her marriage to an extent. It is a marriage of convenience, and it is a product of the society in which they live and the cultural context in which they live. And ultimately, at the end, she does not attempt to. Attempt to challenge Tom, but it is shut down. And we see that in the scene where they're at the dinner and the telephone rings. So that is Daisy. We see Jordan, who symbolizes the gradual change and the role of women in society. She is a liberated woman of the 1920s. She earns her own money by playing golf, and she is a socialite. She gossips and is giddy, and she feels no pressure to settle down, and she does symbolise the change that women are becoming increasingly confident. And then we have Myrtle Wilson, who also is reliant on men. She's reliant on George, her husband. However, he doesn't provide for her or give her the life she wants, so therefore she starts an affair with Tom Buchanan. She wants a better life. She is controlled by Tom, who is violent towards her, and her death is treated as tragic and she is treated as tragic and desperate, and her life almost did not matter. So they are the three women that we study for the role of women in The Great Gatsby. Now we're going to have a look at Playboy. So the female characters in Playboy largely comply with the expected gender roles, with a few exceptions. And those exceptions are Peggy and Mike and Widow Quinn. Peggy and Mike is powerless, and she does what she's told. She runs the pub for her father, etc. She does complain about her father, who leaves her alone to go drinking with his friends, and that is similar to Daisy in The Great Gatsby. Later, she disobeys her father and demands to marry Christy and overcomes expectations of society, so she does stand up for herself. She does find power in attacking Sean Keogh. She is condescending and dismissive of him. At times, she is violent in her language and in how she turns on Christy and scorches his leg, and she's surprisingly masculine at times in the play. And finally, her relationship with Christy does show a softer side of women at the time. However, she is the seducer. She is not seduced by Christy, she seduces him. We also see the Widow Quinn, who is a powerful woman who does not depend on men, and she is independent like Jordan in The Great Gatsby. She strikes a deal to help Sean Keogh with pegging, and then she does the same with Christy. But ultimately, she is compassionate and does try and help Christy. So there is flexibility around gender roles in the Playboy of the Western world. The women are stronger to a certain extent. So that's Playboy, and now we're going to go and have a look at Brooklyn. So, the role of women, gender role plays a significant role in Brooklyn. We see the women in Ireland and the women in America. So the women in Ireland are restrictive, and it's a stifling place for women. Women work menial jobs, such as they work in Mrs. Kelly's shops. Mrs. Kelly is portrayed as a matriarch. She offers no compassion to Eilish for leaving, making her feel guilty for leaving her mother and Rose to ultimately look after her mother. The role of daughters at the time in Ireland was to look after others, while the men made all the key decisions. So that's women in Ireland. But then we see women in America who are completely opposite to the women in Ireland. They're opinionated, independent and confident. And we see this through Georgina, the Irish woman who is living in New York, who Eilish meets on the boat on the way over. Women are free to express themselves and make their own choices. There is more employment opportunities and education opportunities. And we see this through Eilish getting a job in the department store and with her getting to attend night school. However, it is limited. There is women only house share, in which Eilish is given a separate entrance due to being the responsible one. So they would not give the separate entrance to some of the other women who would be seen as possibly promiscuous. So there's still an expectation on women to behave a certain way due to religion. And we see that women in America are free, like Peggy and the Widow Quinn in Playboy of the Western World, but at times they're also restricted, like Daisy in The Great Gatsby. So that's the similarities and the differences in the role of women. Now we're going to move on to social class. So, social class, here we go. So there's vast social class differences that are evident in The Great Gatsby. A character's position within their social class system has a major impact on their lives. So the first is it's social class. We see the old money. And old money is represented by the characters of Daisy and Tom. They're elite, they're in a leisure class, they do not have to work, and they have no knowledge of what it's like to struggle financially. Then we see new money, which is represented by Gatsby. He is newly rich, but is still of a lower status. He has no pedigree and he's perceived as a blow-in. Gatsby attempts to pass himself off as old money by claiming he studied at Oxford and by using the phrase old sport. At first, Daisy does not notice or care that Gatsby fails to conform as a gentleman, but ultimately she chooses Tom, possibly down to his connections to the upper class. Gatsby fails to pick up on subtle social signals that is aligned for being with new money. He has no horses, he prefers cars instead, and this is why old money perceive him to have no pedigree. Gatsby himself as a character was born into a lower class, and he is the only character in the novel to move between social classes, so moving between a lower class up to a higher class and having new money. And then we see the poverty-stricken Wilsons who have no money. They live in the Valley of the Ashes. It's a desolate area. It's for poor people who work for a living. Myrtle wishes to move social class, but ultimately this is never possible. Tom was never going to marry her. She would be beneath him. So that's how we see social class. So social class in Gatsby, old money, new money, no money. Okay, moving on to Playboy. So Playboy is set in a world of the impoverished Irish peasant class. The stage directions make this clear. Peggy wears usual peasant clothes, not class, sorry. The family run a shebeen, which is rough and untidy, and it's a pub. The characters are unglamorous and unhealthy, which shows a sign of their poverty. There is very little education, and that's seen through the character of Christy, who's described as a dunce and beaten in school by old Mahon. Christy's aspiration of a job, he is happy to be pop boy and he's easily satisfied, so it shows that there's no opportunity within this class or within this society. And pegging gives Christy a higher social standing. So that's what makes pegging so appealing to Christy, is the fact that she comes from what he sees to be a well-to-do family. And this is something that he could never himself hope to achieve, hence the reason he's so happy to be marrying her. This is completely unlike The Great Gatsby, and emigration is, it's important to point out, offered to Christy, a ticket to America to a better life, but ultimately he decides to stay with Peggy. So that is social class within Playboy. We only see one version of it. Moving on to Brooklyn. Okay, so the film explores social class in Ireland and America. Ireland is seen as a place of limited social mobility, so you're not able to move between classes. A person's worth is determined by their wealth and position in society. So, for example, Mrs. Kelly's shop, the rich is served first, and Mrs. Kelly dismisses the poorer customers and humiliates them. Snobbery is a feature of small town life in Ireland. We do get to witness a middle class, which are the rugby boys. Their families are old and established in the area. They possibly run their own businesses, like Jim Farrell's family. Eilish's life is affected by the social standing. She leaves because there is no hope of finding a job, and she actually has very little possessions herself, and we see that by Rose buying her things to go to America, or giving her things to go to America. Jim Farrell, who we see in Brooklyn, is a privileged person. He comes from good social standing and he will inherit the family home, and we see his class and pedigree by when him and his family ask Eilish over for afternoon tea. So that's social class in Ireland. But in America, we see that social class offers more opportunity for those who work hard to make a new life for themselves. It is a freer society. We see that the women in the boarding house, they all work in upmarket department stores. We see that Eilish has the opportunity to study at night. And Tony is the one character who offers us a view of the working class America. His family live in an apartment and their life is not easy, but they're hoping to make it easier for the next generation. The family want to own a construction company, and we do see that out of the family and Tony's brothers, that Frankie, the youngest brother, is the only brother or the only member of the family who has a hope of finishing school completely. So the Fiorellos are the view of the working class in New York at the time. But you still have that idea that America gives opportunities to those who work hard, and where Ireland doesn't. So that is social class across all three texts. So now we're going to look at the third page. Okay, so in the third page, we cover the topics of religion, marriage, diversity, war, and law. So the first we're going to have a look at is religion. So this section is going to study how religion affects the cultural context of all three plays, or all three texts. Okay, so in The Great Gatsby, religion is more or less absent from the upper echelons of society. So the old money, the new money, the religion isn't present. So there's a clear lack of moral standards. The only mention of God appears through George Wilson's dialogue, and when he states his wife can't fool God till he sees and judges all. The other characters, so the wealthier characters, are not guided by religion. They find other codes to guide their behaviour, such as their father's advice, undying love, or self-serving ideas. Ultimately, in The Great Gatsby, capitalism rules. The only God that can exist in this society and that is represented by the eyes of T.J. Eckleburg, the advertisement for the glasses. Making money is what is, or deemed to be, the religion in Great Gatsby. Okay, so Playboy. Religion is a major part of cultural context in Ireland. It is everywhere in the play. The characters bless each other when they enter or leave. We see the importance of funerals when Michael and his friends attend. The local priest is never on stage, but the characters portray his views, and his views are taken seriously, and we see that through the characters of Widow Quinn and Sean. The priest is the moral judge and jury of society. Everyone's worried about what he'll say, what he will think. And religion is a source of morality, of right and wrong, and this is completely opposite to what life is like in Gatsby. Religion is also a major part of the cultural context in Brooklyn. It is more important in Ireland than it is in New York. Society in Ireland and in the film is based around mass, funerals and weddings. Eilish sees religion as an obligation, something she has to do, has to go to when she's home. In New York, though, religion has a broader role within society. Father Flood shows the power of religion to get Eilish work, to get her educated, to get her into the night classes. So we see that even though in America, religion still holds power, but it's used more as a force of good rather than a force to control. Mrs. Keogh takes religion seriously. She says grace before meals and is impressed when Eilish volunteers on Christmas Day, and she is a strong believer in no sex before marriage. But you have to remember, she comes from an Irish background herself, so has been influenced by how religion is perceived in Irish society, and that's what she brought to America. So that is religion in all three texts. Now we're going to have a look at marriage in all three texts. So marriage in The Great Gatsby questions what marriage is really about. Is it representative of love and loyalty? Both marriages in the text are marked by adultery, which is Tom and Daisy and George and Myrtle's. Marriage is more a matter of convenience than love. The whole idea of Daisy's marriage to Tom, she was marrying within her social class. It was convenient. She wasn't allowed to marry Gatsby. And marriage is seen to enslave the women in the novel. Jordan is able to be free as a woman because she's not married, she's not tied down to any man, whereas Daisy is the obedient and dutiful wife. Okay, so that's marriage in Gatsby. So, Gatsby shows a negative view of marriage, and we also see a negative view of marriage in Playboy of the Western World. Peggy does not love Sean. She wants to meet a man with a mighty spirit. The marriage between Pegeen and Sean is arranged, and it's a good bargain. It's arranged by Pegeen's father, and Sean is more concerned with the church's approval than with Pegeen's consenting to the wedding, basically. Marriage is all about striking deals. So we see Sean and Christy, Sean and the widow Quinn and Christy. So Sean tries to get Christy to leave. The widow Quinn tries to strike a bargain for herself with the use of land, the use of a pass, when she agrees to help Sean stop the marriage between Pegeen and Christy. And then the widow Quinn also negotiates the same deal for herself with Christy. The only sign of real love is that between Pegeen and Christy, and that they are both willing to fight for the marriage. But Christy underestimates Pegeen, and she does eventually turn on him, but her love makes him stronger and braver. Pegeen realises too late that Christy was ultimately worthy of her love, and ultimately she accepts a loveless marriage with Sean Keogh. So, negative view of marriage in Playboy of the Western World, similar to Gatsby. Okay, and then we have Marriage in Brooklyn. And much of the social life in Wexford revolves around weddings. Mary would love Eilish to marry Jim. Eilish attends Mary's wedding with her mother and Jim. And marriage is viewed as the ultimate commitment. Divorce was not legal in Ireland. Jim intends to ask Eilish to marry him. Marriage is also important to Tony, and the promise of marriage is not enough for him before Eilish goes home to Ireland. Eilish does sleep with Tony before marriage. That does show that the younger generation is less strict and less under the control of the church. Mrs. Kelly ultimately threatens to reveal Eilish's marital status, but Eilish, as you know, refuses to be bullied. The view of marriage is largely a positive one, and that people marry for love and that love does matter, which is completely opposite to the other two texts. So that's marriage in all three texts. Moving on. Okay, what I'm going to do here, because just the way the pictures were, I'm actually going to look at diversity, war and law within Gatsby, and then within Playboy, and then within Brooklyn. And then we're going to compare all three of them as we go along. So, next three titles are these. So, diversity in Great Gatsby. New York is a largely white city with a growing black and Asian communities. All characters are white in the novel, so there's no ethnic diversity. Tom is hostile to social change and his views on race is not taken seriously. Nick's use of a language does show that New York is deeply divided on racial grounds, even though we don't get to see it in the novel, where he describes two black men as two bucks fighting over a girl. And we also see his description of Meyer Wolfsheim as a flat-nosed Jew. So there is divided racial grounds, but we don't actually get to witness it in the novel. The war is a defining effect in the 20th century in America. Gatsby meets Daisy when he was stationed in Camp Taylor. He was awarded for his bravery in the war. Gatsby does recognise Nick from the war, and this does connect the characters. But ultimately, the war did not disrupt the lives of the wealthy, such as Tom Buchanan. And then law in Gatsby is largely ignored. It has a major impact on society Gatsby is seen as a murderer, and these are the rumours surrounding his character. We also see that the World Poker Series in 1919, there was cheating involved. We see bribery happen. There is a sense of danger around Wolfsheim himself, and there is a disregard for prohibition with Gatsby's party, the alcohol, and the how Gatsby made his money bootlegging. So they are the areas of diversity, war and law in Gatsby. Okay, so diversity in Playboy. All the characters are white Irish Catholic peasants. There is no racism. There's no anti-Semitism. Society is very insular. And Christy Mahon becomes a source of fascination for the characters. He is a stranger from a nearby village who captures their imagination. So we really get as in a sense that there is a lack of knowledge even about different ethnicities and race. Like, it just in 1907 in Ireland, that would never be the case. So that's why society is very insular. They're all very, very similar people. War in Playboy of the Western world is not a large part. Society showed in Playboy is that of a colony which is under British rule. The characters do fear an uprising, and there is a memory of war and an acknowledgement of future conflicts, which obviously we know happens a few years later, but it's not a main part of Playboy at all. And then law. In Playboy of the Western world, characters are unconcerned by the rule of law. There is no loyalty to Britain or the institution, and the characters in Playboy of the Western world deal their own justice to Christie. They do not rely on any law structures to do that. So that is diversity, war and law in Playboy. And finally, we're going to look at those headings again under Brooklyn. So diversity in Brooklyn. The film portrays a society which is increasingly diverse. There is no racism, no anti-Semitism. There is diversity, but it is part of the endearing nature of New York. It is completely unlike Ireland. The Ireland to Eilish has left. And being exposed to this diverse culture and community in place does help Eilish grow as a person and in confidence. New York is diverse, but yet we do see different ethnic groups, but like I said earlier, they still live in isolation to one another. War in Brooklyn. None of the characters have served in war. The war, although because it's set in a post-war society, has allowed for the American dream. People are very proud of their heritage. And the only kind of reference to a post-war society that we do witness is that Tony and his family are moving out to the suburbs, and they hope to build a house and a life for themselves out there. And this was called the White Flight. So where white people left the city for a more comfortable life in the suburbs. So that's war in Brooklyn. And then law in Brooklyn. Law is ultimately respected in the film. Eilish moved to New York legally. The Fiorellos distanced themselves from the Italian mafia. They work hard themselves. They work hard to achieve everything they have achieved. And apart from hearing sirens in the background, the odd time in the soundscape of the movie, we do not witness any crime. So that is the end of these notes. I hope that the breakdown of the notes in this way have helped you. If you've any questions, please do let me know. I will post a question on cultural context to be done for maybe, I'll put it up on Thursday, and I might get you to hand it in Monday, because I do want you to put serious effort into the question that I give you, because I'm going to try pick a general one that you'll be well able to put as much information as you can into the answer. Learn it off by heart. Your cultural context and your theme and issue notes are the notes, and I said this a million times, that you can learn off by heart and regurgitate in that English exam. So I really want you to put a huge effort into this answer. I hope these have helped. Let me know if there's anything else I can do, and if you have any questions, either put it into the chat in Teams or just email me directly. Okay guys, I hope this was helpful. Bye.